Welcome to another educational and inspiring AAM workshop. This workshop is entitled Interacting Effectively with Police for Activists. This workshop will cover how to talk to the police, including do's and don'ts and the golden rules when interacting with police, what typically happens post-arrest. And JJ and Adam will both share their experiences interfacing with police during activism. Now, my name is Michelle Granberg, and I'm your moderator. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been vegan and an activist for almost 6 years. AAM's mission is to eradicate violence and build a culture of empathy and compassion, which ultimately results in animal liberation. We strive to build a global community of activists through our free online program that pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. Through one-on-one mentoring, we strive to generate an increased number of effective activists worldwide because this movement needs more activists. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of AR activism. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host live large-scale activism events. So stay tuned, I'll be announcing those at the end of our workshop. AAM is also proud to be fueled by FARM, the Farmed Animal Rights Movement, one of the oldest AR organizations in the country. If you're interested in applying to become a mentor or mentee, or want to get more involved or to donate, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and FARM on social media. So that being said, we can get started. I'm going to introduce our guest speaker. Jonathan Horn has been active in the animal rights movement for nearly 4 years and has been a campaigner for PETA for the last 3 years. As a campaigner, JJ travels all around the country, leading PETA demonstrations and interviewing with media outlets. JJ has organized nearly 100 active actions for PETA, in addition to being actively involved with grassroots groups, including AAM. And joining JJ tonight is Adam Henry. Adam is an activist for over 6 years and an AAM mentor. We'll open up for questions and answers after both presentations, and I'm going to now turn it over to JJ. So JJ, go ahead.
Hello, thanks for having me here today, AAM. I'm excited to give this very important presentation about interacting with the police and how to do it effectively. And it's sad that Mikey was not able to join us. He's under the weather today. I too am also feeling a bit under the weather, so if my voice cracks or if I'm coughing, that's why. But I'm going to try to muscle through this. So I'm going to miss you, Mikey, but I am fortunate that Adam was willing to step up at the last minute to join me. He actually helped work on this presentation with me for a local training that we were going to do with local Chicago activists. So it worked out perfect that he is able to present, since he was a huge part of putting this presentation together. You might hear my birds in the background squawking and chirping. They're quite friendly and fun, but they're also a little bit loud. But I like to be with them when I'm presenting, so they can just have fun. So enjoy their screeches in the background from time to time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We'll get the presentation started. All right, so the title of the presentation tonight is Police Interactions, and also along with interacting with the police, we're also going to discuss values-based security culture, which is just a simple introduction to effective and safe communication for activists. So I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I think this is very important information that all activists at every level should know about and should regularly be introduced to over and over again, because it's something that it can keep you out of trouble, and it can make your life a lot easier as an activist, make you more effective as an activist. And it's something that just should be totally indoctrinated into all of us. And used at every single action we are a part of. And you might have seen during the promotional video that I recorded, I said, who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. And that is very important. We are only as good as all of the members of our community. And so anyone who doesn't act professionally and disciplined is a risk to the entire community. And this training will help everyone to be more disciplined and to understand why it's so important to be disciplined in your communication, whether it's with police, other activists, the general public, or anywhere else where we're being recorded, whether again by police or industry or just the public. We want to look good to the public, and we want to be above reproach from the public and also from law enforcement and anyone else that we're interacting with. So here's a brief overview of all the different things we're going to be touching today. We're going to talk about some key terms that you may or may not know already. You might hear these terms throughout the presentation tonight and also just in your activism careers. So it's important to know these terms. We're going to talk about security culture norms. And these are just, again, effective ways to communicate and keeping each other safe. We're going to talk about action behaviors, because a lot of times the reason we're interacting with police is because of our behaviors. And so we want to, again, be above reproach and professional at our actions. There will, always be police at pretty much every protest we do, even if it's a First Amendment protected on the sidewalk protest. The police will show up to keep everyone involved safe. That means both the activists and the general public, and how you interact with them can determine whether you're increasing, the escalation with them or de-escalating it, and can make just everything smoother for everyone involved. We're also going to talk about what happens if things sometimes go awry, and occasionally an activist is arrested. That happened to me in Chicago. I was arrested, totally was not expecting it. So I'll talk a little bit about my experience, and when we open up for Q&A at the end, other people can discuss their experiences. We'll also talk about jail support. So what you can do as a member of the activism community when a fellow activist is arrested and is going through, the trauma that's involved with being booked and possibly having a court date and the legal fees and everything else. How can you help your fellow activists to make that a little bit easier on them? And then at the end, we'll have that open discussion Q&A. So I'm going to hand it over to Adam at this point, and he's going to discuss some of the key terms. So take it away, Adam.
All right. Thanks, JJ. And can everyone hear me okay? Starting with JJ, we good?
Yeah, I hear you fine, Adam. Go ahead.
Thank you, JJ. All right, everyone. Thanks again for all of your time and attention to this matter tonight. And I love the fact that we can get into this. It's such an important topic, as JJ has said. So some of the ground rules that I like to set when I start to talk about things like this is just to acknowledge that topics such as personal safety, repression against activists, surveillance, words like infiltrator, this can bring out certain anxieties and concerns. However, us in the Animal Rights Chicago community, as well as the mentors, we are confident that discussing this topic will keep us safer and more effective at our activism versus the idea of creating some level of undue or unnecessary discussion or angst about what is security culture. So like JJ said, we're going to jump right into key terms. And when these key terms, I'd just like you to consider nonviolent direct action in general, which is abbreviated on this slide in the second bullet, NVDA. These terms are used oftentimes to talk about what level of action you might be getting involved in, red, yellow, or green. For instance, an action where you may not be expecting to be arrested because, of course, you're just expressing your First Amendment rights would be an action you might consider a very green action. One where you might escalate using your First Amendment rights by having amplified sound or something like that, you might consider, you know, getting to that point where you might consider it a yellow action, just a little bit more interaction with police and possibility of repression, and then further red actions, which we won't get into here, just as a matter of principle. So escalation, again, risk level, civil disobedience, these are terms that folks often pile into nonviolent direct action, and are definitely terms that we want to understand, right? And we want to know so that we can draw the lines between exactly what we're doing and what our intentions are at an action, in order to stay safe, like JJ said, and you'll hear us repeat it again. Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. So one of the things I want to define for everyone, VPN, virtual provider network, it's a term that has become increasingly important over the last recent few years. And I think with the revelations of Edward Snowden and some of the things that we see about election interference across the globe, we know that we are being tracked on an internet level. So very important to be on a virtual private network, using things like encrypted media, social media platforms like Signal, WhatsApp, versus using platforms like Facebook and other open public Twitter platforms to plan your actions. And then again, finally, knowing your action roles, right? Defining that as liaisons, marshals, folks that are going to be the public communicator, folks that are going to interact with police. Keep those designated action roles planned during and throughout your whole action, and keep them in place from right from the start to the finish, in order to build that security culture, versus handing things off inside and outside of actions. Well, in 1 minute, I'm going to be the police liaison, and the next minute I'm giving a speak out. That kind of thing kind of throws the action for a loop, throws participants who are brand new to action a little bit off. So things to focus on there is just keeping your action well planned and in order from start to finish. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit wordy. As you might know, Voice Free Mikey was supposed to present tonight, but I'm backing him up, so I'm doing my best here. All right, on to the next slide, JJ. Let's talk about social norms and security norms. There are two simple rules here. If we could keep these rules golden and simple, they are this. If someone doesn't need to know something about an action, don't tell them. If you don't need to know something about an action, don't ask. We get involved. There's not much more or less to say here, but when we're getting involved in expressing our First Amendment rights, and we start winning, folks that are our opponents who perceive us as winning will try to repress us, and will try to find out information, will find their way in. This reminds me of something that I just recently heard in the news, which is that the FBI got caught doing something like a triple the amount of the number of searches they did last year, unwarranted searches of Americans' data. So again, I'll cite that at the end of this presentation, because I want folks to know, and just in case I got it wrong right there, that they are into our information, and we want to be clear. If someone doesn't need to know something, don't tell them. If you don't need to know something, don't ask. It keeps you safe, it keeps them safe, and it keeps us successful. So JJ, to the next slide on social norms. So what does this mean when we get into planning our actions, right? We do have to share some level of information. We do have to we do socialize before and after actions. We do have a community where we're proud of what we do, right? And so what does this mean when we're together, and how do we conduct ourselves? How do we plan for actions? Well, some key things to think about is only involving those who will be directly aiding the action. This means that no action planning in public group chats or other public forums, like I mentioned earlier about your chats. Actions likely involving greater police interaction should only be discussed in private, and action-specific signal channels or best in person. And so when I say action-specific signal channels or encrypted channels, many of us have our involved in the ins and outs of the week-long action that you're doing, right, or that you're planning. So you want to keep those messages tight to the folks that are maybe just the liaisons, just the marshals, just the folks that have those key action roles, right? Further, after the action, before the action, we're socializing. Really key to remember these points. Don't talk about actions that you and others have taken unless they're already public. Don't go around repeating names and times and places. This is not only dangerous for you, but it's dangerous for everyone else that's involved that day in an action. And it's something that we commonly do, frankly, all of us, without really realizing very much that we've done so. One of the points that I want to hit home a little bit, and maybe we can expand on it later around social norms, is don't waste time and energy, and in fact, try to remove the word from your vocabulary entirely, the infiltrator, right? The infamous one person that is watching us, right, or agitating us. It's just not likely. From history, we know that it's far safer and more effective to keep your community secure by focusing on the bad behaviors of folks that are infiltrators and agitators versus the one infiltrator. And so when I say it's just not likely that there is one infiltrator somewhere or one agitator, it's much more likely that repression is coming at you in many directions when you become a successful movement such as us. But we often do the opposite of what we should be doing, right? We should be focusing on those behaviors of agitators and infiltrators and folks like the FBI and the other alphabet soup crew versus who is the infiltrator around us, because we're just not going to figure that out. It's a wasteful exercise. And if you root out the behaviors, then the folks that are perpetrating those behaviors that are insecure can't really function to infiltrate or agitate your grassroots organization. So moving on then to the next slide. Again, I know I'm getting kind of wordy here, JJ, but please check me on time. Communications, how am I doing, JJ?
You're good. Keep going.
All righty, thank you. Communications, right? Again, we do want to talk about our participation in NVDA. We do want to be proud of sharing our experiences. We want to speak up for the animals and broaden their voices on social media. We want to share our actions in a big way. We love Trey's phenomenal videos, right? And we don't mind that our names and faces are in them. However, there are ways to keep us safe, keeping details to a minimum, keeping the focus on the animals versus the humans. We come to these actions with many of our own barriers, with many of our own sort of baggage, right? But we have to leave that at the door, so to speak. These speak outs should be involving non-humans, right? Not our what we bring to the action, right? But the non-humans that we're focused on. So again, being focused on them takes the focus off of what action are you doing that may be perceived as some action that's incorrect when actually you are just, again, expressing your First Amendment rights. Keeping up that figurative wall when you're planning an action between this is a professional, grassroots, nonviolent direct action that I am participating in versus this is where I can meme drop and share my jokes and shit talk about, you know, shutting down the fur industry. I'm more than happy to be parts of channels like that, but we have to set up that wall when we're working on nonviolent direct action that says here in this space, we keep this focused and secure. Phone calls are ideal, text messages less ideal, in person best way to keep in touch. Why is this important? Basic ground rules. To the next slide, JJ. Basic ground rules keep us safe. This does not have to be complicated. Every slide before us just now was basic stuff. I hope some of you have heard it before. I hope you've learned something from it just now. However, I just want to say all this is going to do for us when we act on this information and act with it will help reduce the effectiveness of infiltration and agitation surveillance tactics. It will build a strong culture that will allow us to make informed decisions about action risk, and it will keep us professional and effective. And that's my dog asking me to go outside. So I'm going to send it back to JJ, and then I'll be back on the other side of JJ's presentation about police interactions and a sip of water.
Thank you so much for that, Adam. It's really great content. And just to add to why basic security culture is important, it's not only important because it makes it reduces the effectiveness of infiltration and surveillance. It also makes us more effective as activists when we know that we have each other's backs and that we feel safe around each other. It promotes good behavior and positive relationships amongst activists instead of allowing for infighting and drama. That could be the work of agitators or infiltration, or it could be the work of just, activists who are undisciplined. But either way, having kind of a zero tolerance for that kind of behavior and explaining why it's important that everyone engages in very principled activism and principled communication will avoid a lot of the interpersonal drama as well as any kind of infiltration or agitation. So when we're going to actions, there's certain things that we should and shouldn't have with us and should and shouldn't do. So first and foremost, it should go without saying, do not bring any sort of weapon or illegal substance to any action ever. That means you don't bring a knife, you don't bring a gun, you don't bring any kind of weapon, you don't bring any kind of drugs, not even legal drugs. Some places marijuana is legal, alcohol is legal, and we shouldn't be under the influence of any of these substances, and we shouldn't have them on us. It's not professional, it doesn't paint us in a good light, and we're not going to be on our game. In addition to that, you should consider leaving your cell phone at home when going to an action, unless you need it. If you need it to communicate with someone, if you're in charge of recording video for social media, of course, we want our actions to go on social media. That's a very effective tool. And we obviously need cameras or cell phones to do that. But if you're not in charge of either of those things, you're best off leaving your cell phone at home. That also goes for other things like money, wallet, other belongings. If you were to be arrested, the cops will take everything from you. You should get it back upon when you leave jail, but there's no guarantee of that. And so it'd be horrible if your necklace was lost that was a gift from your grandma or something you really cherish. So just don't bring it with you if you don't want it confiscated from the police and maybe not given back to you. So if you do bring those items with you, you can either leave them in your car or you can designate an activist to take cell phones, also car keys. If you were to be arrested, you're going to want your fellow activists to pay for your parking so you don't get towed or ticketed. So in Chicago, we'll frequently designate an activist to take cell phones, take keys, and make sure that if anyone were to be arrested, their meters are paid or they can move their car somewhere where it won't get towed. So if you have your cell phone on you, some suggestions are the easiest ones are to delete and reinstall Signal before an action, and this gets rid of any important information on your phone. Better is to have your phone completely shut down and encrypted with a password, not a fingerprint or Face ID. And don't just make your password your birthday or like a 4-character number. You can make it like many characters, and it makes it much harder for anyone to get into your phone. And then there's also a setting on iPhone. I'm not sure about Android, but you can set to factory reset on 10 failed password attempts. So these are all things we can implement to keep our information secure and safe. And then the best thing is, again, to not just bring your phone at all. Some people bring burner phones or a secondary phone that they wipe before every action so that there's just not old information or information about other activists, photos from previous actions. So just it's minimal information on the phone. So that's one way you can bring your phone and keep it a little more secure. When we are at actions, we are not only keeping each other safe, but we're also the only advocates that animals have. And so our behavior determines whether people take us seriously, whether people see us as professional or see us as, violent or aggressive. So it's very important that we hold each other and as well as ourselves accountable for our behaviors. We cannot rely on the police to protect us. If a confrontation happens with the public, we should have it in our minds that de-escalating the situation is our responsibility. We should handle this in a nonviolent way by simply standing between the public and the activists and use calm words to de-escalate and try not to provoke. Don't touch me, that's assault. Everyone should have that phrase memorized. Don't touch me, that's assault. Most people, when they hear that, will back off if things are starting to get escalated and they're making any kind of physical content, touching you, touching your signs, touching your phone. We are all trained activists. Many of you are a part of AAM because you want more training to be a more professional activist. And I like to think of myself as a professional activist, and I like to think of everyone that I'm working with as a professional activist. And I think when you have that mentality of we are professional activists, whether we work for PETA or not, whether it is actually a job we're getting paid for, we should treat it as such, as if it is our profession. And when you are at actions, you should have your full attention focused on the action. Frequently after actions, people go to socialize, and that's great, but while we're at actions, we should really be focused on why we're there. So side conversations don't look as professional. Worrying about where we're going to eat after doesn't look great. We want to be really focused on why we're there. So treat it like it's your job, even if it's not. I already mentioned, do not bring drugs or alcohol to an action, and do not be under the influence. Basically, the rules are, if you were going to your job, how would you act? What would you bring? What would you do? And if you apply that to activism, it's probably the right answer there too. We need to stay focused while we're there, and that helps us not only be more effective for the animals, but you might notice when someone walking by is becoming more aggressive and can de-escalate it sooner before it leads into a full-on confrontation. You'll also be more, if you're not one of the main organizers or a marshal or a police liaison, you'll be able to pick up cues from them on how you should behave if maybe a situation is unsafe and you should leave, or if there is police repression, if they're starting to arrest activists and it might be time to leave. It's definitely better if you're focused and aware of these things early on. It helps us run like a well-oiled machine, and it makes us as effective as possible when we're out in the streets. It also gives us a more positive public perception. Unfortunately, the public tends to look down on people who fight for whatever cause they're passionate about because we inconvenience them. We're talking in megaphones, we're loud, and people just don't like that. We're seen as an inconvenience, blocking the sidewalk or whatever they may be complaining about. They're forced to listen to our message, whether they want to or not. And so we want to make that kind of as easy on them as possible. And so I always like to keep a smile on my face when I'm at actions, even when I'm talking to someone who has no interest in going vegan and is maybe being a little more aggressive. And they will look for every reason to discredit you, to cancel you, to not listen to your message. So don't give them that reason. Don't use swear words in front of them. Don't agitate them. Don't talk to them aggressively. Instead, fill them with kindness. How we speak and interact with the public and how we handle ourselves on the streets can make or break the mission of the movement. It can make or break the success of an action. On top of that, the police are also going to be scrutinizing every move we do as activists. Don't give them any reason to try to make an example of you or to try to shut down an action because someone is getting unruly or aggressive. If you're upstanding and you're positive and you're not doing anything aggressive, they shouldn't have any reason to. And that keeps yourself safe and it keeps everyone else safe at the action and makes us more effective.
And JJ, if I could, before you jump into police interaction, I just want to say one last thing on this. Thank you. To your point about action behaviors and especially your last point right there, not giving the police a reason here, right? So our opponents will literally do anything to get in our way, make us look bad, incriminate us. And we're not saying necessarily police are our opponents, but they have a job to do, right? Our opponents are also going to do things that are illegal, unwarranted, like I mentioned, but none of this, the annoyance of a police officer at the side of a sidewalk in front of a retailer, The fact that we might be potentially being monitored unlawfully, none of it is a reason to stop speaking, to stop acting, or anything like that, but rather a reason to be more principled about how we act and communicate. And I think JJ is going to knock it out right here with police interaction.
Great point, Adam. So as Adam said too, the police are not the target of animal rights actions. You know, we're there for a specific business that we're trying to get to go for free, or we're there to outreach the public about a vegan diet, or protesting animals used in lab, or at the circus, or whatever else. The police will be there to monitor the situation. And so I always say, like, don't necessarily see the police as your enemy, but also don't see them as necessarily your friend either. They're there to do a job. They're there to keep everyone safe, but ultimately they tend to side with the businesses, and the businesses we are going after are the ones who are exploiting animals. So your best bet is to just not interact with the police, because everything you say can and will be used against you. They frequently are wearing body cams and recording things. There's frequently surveillance cameras outside of any store that is going to pick up every action you do. So know that you're being monitored, know that everything's being recorded. And as long as you keep that in mind, it should help you decide what your behavior should be. Again, don't see them as your friend either, because you don't want to let your guard down. Again, not because they're necessarily your enemy, but you don't want to be sharing information with them, thinking that you can trust them, because that information could be used against you. I've had experiences where I was with an unruly passerby. In fact, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I got spit on and then punched several times in the gut by a guy who kept escalating. We were doing our best to de-escalate the situation, but this guy just decided to keep going after us, and he assaulted one of my activists. I stood between them and said, "Don't touch her, that's assault. You need to leave." And at that point, he started punching me. So I know firsthand how important it is to de-escalate a situation with the public. And the police were right there immediately and ready to get between me and my assailant and make sure that no one was harmed. So they did exactly their job in that situation, which was to remove the person who was being violent with the activists and allow us to continue with their action. They don't always do that though, and that's why we need to look out for each other and keep each other safe. And frequently they are there to protect the businesses, and those businesses are the ones exploiting animals, they're abusing animals, they're destroying our planet, they're harming human and non-human life. And so the police frequently are on the side of the business. That's just the way the laws are written in this country, and that's the way that it's set up. So keeping that in mind, I think makes you have a really good understanding of what your relationship is to the police at actions. So the golden rule, if there's anything to take away from today's presentation when it comes to interacting with police, it's do not interact with the police. Only the trained police liaisons, sorry, Gatsby is joining in the conversation here. Only trained police liaisons should be the ones interacting with police. This allows us to control what is being told to them, and it allows us to keep better control of the situation than if 50 different people are talking to the police. We want to keep in mind that everything we say and do is being recorded, and it will be used against you. We highly encourage rotating police liaisons for each action so that they're not always seeing the same face day after day after day. It helps keep fellow activists safe, and it's also good training for people in the community to shadow a more seasoned liaison and to have experience being the liaison with a more senior liaison looking over their shoulder. So eventually everyone should be trained to do that job, but unless you have been assigned that role, your job is not to interact with the police. And we will be doing through AAM, as well as locally here in Chicago, more training specifically on what it means to be a police liaison. But first, we want to get these golden rules down that apply to all the other activists at an action before we go into the more deep depths of being a police liaison. So, general advice: there are 0 reasons to speak to the cops if you are not a police liaison. Doing so puts all activists in danger. So what do? You remain silent. Do not lie to the police. You're better off not knowing information and not sharing information because you cannot lie to the police. So just don't say anything. Assume you are being recorded. We should also be able to control the narrative because the police are going to have their narrative. And if there's an arrest and a prosecution, they're going to have their side and their narrative. So we should record all police interactions. This holds them accountable and allows us to have counter evidence if we were to ever be arrested and taken to court. You want to record names and badge numbers of police officers. Do not touch police or their equipment. This is very important. There is never a reason to touch a police officer or their equipment. And you will be in trouble if you do that. Very serious trouble. You can get charged with assaulting a police officer. So do not engage in that kind of behavior. And along that, keep your hands visible. Keep your hands where the police can see them. There's no way to spin that story that you were doing anything inappropriate if your hands are in sight the entire time and on camera. You can't be accused of doing something that you weren't doing. So keep those hands visible. You also don't, things are tense when we're at action sometimes and police are on edge. You might be on edge. And so keeping your hands visible shows that I am not a threat. I'm not here to hurt anyone, and it just keeps everyone safe. Also, stay around other activists. Sometimes police will pull you to the side. They'll say, oh, it's hard to hear here. Can we talk in private? Can we talk to the side? Urge them that you would like to stay where you're at and keep activists around you that can monitor the situation and record the situation. You should be recording, and any activists who have their phones or cameras with them should be recording all of those interactions. And as soon as you get home from an action, whether you're arrested or not, but especially if you were detained or arrested, write down your own narrative. Try to be as detailed as possible. List the times, the events, the officers who were on site, the activists who were there. We want to have our own narrative in case it were to ever go to court so that we can defend ourselves. So it's not your word against theirs. You have evidence to back it up. So I'm going to get a quick drink of water because my voice is getting really hoarse. So there are 3 different levels of police interactions. Most interactions with police, and this should only involve the liaisons, are conversations. And that's the police just wondering how long you're going to be in action, why you're there, reminding you not to block sidewalks or roads or whatever, just general conversation with police. So that's like 90% of your interactions, probably 99% of your interactions with police when you're at an action. And you can see me there all the way on the left, interacting with the police at a Canada Goose protest that I led in Chicago a couple of years ago. The next level of police interaction is detention. During detention, the police have not arrested you, but they are restricting you from leaving a specific area. So you can see that's actually me there in the elephant suit in the middle picture, being detained by police. So detention doesn't always lead to arrest, but it sometimes does. And it's important to know the difference between the two. I have been detained by police at actions several times, and I've only been arrested once, and there was actually no detention before that arrest. So many times detention does not lead to arrest. They're just getting information. They may be trying to de-escalate a situation. There's a number of reasons. But when you're in the point of detention, you want to do everything in your power to make sure it doesn't lead to arrest. And then the last level of interaction is like the highest level of interaction, and that is the arrest. And you can see in the third photo, that is me being arrested at a fur protest in Chicago last year. So we're going to dive a little more into the details of each of these. So first level, conversation. 3 rules for a conversation with police: shut up, move away, and repeat if they follow. You do not have to answer an officer's question. So if the officer asks you a question and you are not the liaison, your response should be, am I being detained? And that's it. You just ask, am I being detained? You can say, I do not want to speak with you. I do not want to answer that question. And at that point, if your phone isn't already out recording, make sure it is. And if you don't have your phone on you because you're a responsible activist who left it at home, make sure someone who does have their phone on them is recording, or a camera, whatever else device you have to record, and make sure all interactions at all times are being recorded with the police. If the officer says you are not being detained, Say, I do not wish to speak with you, and move away from the cop. You should then inform your police liaison that there was an interaction with police so that they can take over. The police may follow you. They may try to talk with you anyway. And if you show that you're a disciplined activist that's not going to speak with them and they're not going to get anywhere with you, they'll hopefully turn their attention to the police liaison who can answer their questions. So just keep moving away from the police. You just shut up, move away, repeat. Am I being detained? They say no, you move away. I do not want to speak with you. They follow, you do it again and again. You do not have to answer their questions. That is your right to remain silent. And it will not benefit you or anyone at the protest to answer those questions. So don't think that there's any benefit to doing that. If the officer does say yes to the question, am I being detained? You are now in the detention level of interaction with police, which is what the next slide is about. The first thing you ask them when being detained is, why am I being detained? And definitely make sure this is being recorded at this point. So the police have told you that you're being detained. You are not free to leave. The first thing you do is ask them why. They need to give you a reasonable, articulable reason why they are detaining you. If they don't, you ask them, am I free to go? If they say no, then you are definitely being detained. You continue to ask them, why am I being detained? If they don't answer, then you ask if you're free to go. If they say no, then you ask again, why am I being detained? They need to answer that question for you. And the reason we do that is because if they give you one reason at the beginning and then that reason changes later, it can be used in court. If you were to be arrested and would have a potential trial, this is information that can help your defense when you're in court. So make sure that that's why it's so important to have everything recorded and why you want to get them to answer that question of why you're being detained. You should be recording. Everyone around you should be recording. I'm going to be repeating that over and over again because it's so important. If they search you or push you around, you say, I do not consent to a search. Explicitly say what you don't consent to. So if they're patting you down, say, I do not consent to a pat down. If they start looking in your bag, say, I do not consent to you looking in my bags. They may search you and pat you down. So that is within their right to do that. But you should still make it clear that you're not consenting to it in case there is any right that is being violated there. Say it out loud, say it explicitly, and make sure you get that on camera. When you're being detained, you cannot, nor should you try to leave. That's very important too. The police can prevent you from leaving. They cannot bring you elsewhere. At the point where they are bringing you elsewhere, you are officially under arrest, which is the next level of interaction. During detention, they will stop you from leaving, but again, they cannot bring you elsewhere. Stay where you're at. Do not try to flee the scene. Frequently during a detention, they will pat down the outside of your body, your wingspan, and they are allowed to search your bag within reach. You are also required to give them your name, your address, and your date of birth, but nothing else, nor should you give them any other information. And you should not answer questions. During detention, they will frequently ask you questions. They're trying to get information. You don't have to answer their questions, and you should not, other than your name, address, and date of birth. That you do have to give them. Any other questions, do not answer. They may try different tactics to get information out of you at this point. Sometimes it's through intimidation, just making it very traumatic and stressful so that you crack and you start talking. Sometimes it's through manipulation and acting friendly, pretending like they're interested in your protest or they believe in what you're doing and just getting you to let your guard down and talk. No matter how friendly they are with you, you cannot trust them because, again, everything you say and do will be used against you every single time. That is their job. So no matter how intimidating it is, don't give in either. You're not going to get off any lighter. There's nothing you're going to say or do that's going to get you out of whatever they have planned for you. So trying to say something to weasel your way out. Well, that was a speciesist term, to finagle your way out is not going to work. It just could potentially lead to more trouble down the line. So,
JJ, sorry, didn't mean to
yes,
interrupt.
Adam.
No, I'm sorry. I thought you were wrapping up. So there was one time in which I was detained, and I want to give an example because I think I'm also seeing it in chats. So municipalities are different. Some police may do this detention interaction differently for that reason. And even within Chicago, in and of itself, within districts in Chicago, I had a different detention interaction in multiple situations. One of them was animal rights related, and the other was not. So what I mean to say is that JJ was saying there's some requirement to give information. I was not required. I was given the option to fill out a ticket that would give me a receipt for the interaction. And I didn't consent to a search, and likely because of the way I look, I was allowed to leave without a search and no receipt of interaction. However, you know, I just wanted to say that, yes, detention can kind of go one way or another. And obviously privileges come along with that. But thanks, JJ.
And along those lines, detention can lead to arrest, but it frequently doesn't. So don't give them any reason to arrest you or incriminate yourself or anyone else in your community. Cooperate with the police at that point. You don't want to be disorderly with them and potentially get a disorderly conduct charge when they weren't going to arrest you for any reason before and were just trying to either de-escalate a situation or gather information. But how you behave in this situation can determine if they have another reason to arrest you. They may be in the wrong in what they're doing, but that's not the time to fight it. You're not an attorney, and even if you are an attorney, you're not in the court room at that point. So it sucks when they're in the wrong, but you can fight this in court if you behave yourself. And so that's the correct time to dispute whether you were wrongfully detained or arrested or treated inappropriately. There was one time Adam explained his experience being detained. There was one time I was detained in a mall in Toronto where they literally locked activists inside of a mall and refused to let us leave. Again, no one was arrested, and eventually they unlocked the doors and let us go because we started chanting and marching around the mall. And that was another example of a detention that didn't lead to an arrest. Where I'm in the elephant costume there was a detention as well that did not lead to an arrest. So it happens frequently where it doesn't lead to arrest. So don't give them that reason. But it can lead to arrest. And that's the highest level of interaction with police. 3 rules at this point: do not resist arrest, cooperate, and shut up. At that point, your mouth is sealed. There is nothing you can say to get out of it. So there's nothing you can do or say at this point to get out of being arrested. So at this point, you don't want to make things worse for yourself. You can always fight charges in court, but you cannot take back anything that you say, and everything is being recorded at this point, and it will be used against you. In my case in Chicago, they submitted my arrest footage, and it turned out to be the wrong arrest footage of another activist. But again, depending on what words are said in that video, it can make you look, either peaceful and calm and cooperative, or it can make you look disorderly and aggressive and violent. And that's not a good look to any judge or jury. So do not give them a reason to see you as anything but the peaceful, wonderful, amazing, compassionate activist that we all are.
With great sunglasses.
Yes, it was sunny that day, had the shades going. When you are arrested, you can potentially be charged with resisting arrest if you make it hard for them to arrest you. So some activists like to do the thing where they drop on the ground and make it more difficult for the police to drag them out. And that's your decision, what you want to do. But just know that anytime you do not cooperate with an arrest, you can be charged with resisting arrest. So that I want to drive that point home because I've heard otherwise. And based on my research, anytime you are not cooperating in their arrest, there is a potential to be charged with resisting arrest. I'm going to drive this point home. Do not say anything. It will be used against you. You could potentially incriminate yourself. I've heard it happen before. I know multiple experiences where people start talking or crying or apologizing. You could also be caught lying, saying something that isn't true, and then you can get that, does not look good in court. So there's just no reason to be talking at that point. This is why it's important to leave valuables at home, because everything except your clothing will be taken from you at the point of arrest when they take you to the station. That's why they also encourage activists to take jewelry off before going to actions, because they will remove every piece of jewelry that you have on you. They'll take your keys, they'll take your phone, they'll take everything from you except your clothes. It's also why it's important not to have a knife on you, not to have a weapon on you, not to have any kind of drugs or any kind of illegal substance, because basically, if you don't want the police to know you have it, don't bring it with you. There's no reason to have them. In Chicago, and I think every community should have this, we have a very zero tolerance policy for any type of weapon or anything that could be used as a weapon at a protest. Like there's absolutely no reason to bring it, and you violate that code and put us all in jeopardy, you're out. Same thing with drugs and alcohol. Do not show up intoxicated under the influence of any substance. It's inappropriate and it puts us all at risk. One thing I also want to touch on being arrested. We've all seen in cop shows where they read you your Miranda rights as they're arresting a suspect. That's not reality. They do not read you your Miranda rights. Makes for good TV, but it's not required nor typically done when being arrested. Before interrogations, yes, they will read you your Miranda rights, but during an arrest, they will not. And you can't. That's totally within their right to not do so. They haven't done anything wrong at that point. So you've been arrested. What should you do? Cooperate, don't say anything or answer questions. You will be searched and patted down multiple times. All items will be taken from you, but returned when you are free to go from the jail. Again, don't bring any items you wouldn't want the police to confiscate or that you wouldn't want want back, because there's no guarantee it will be given back. They shouldn't intentionally take anything from you, but there's no guarantees, so don't bring anything that you can't live without. You'll be booked, which means fingerprinted, mug shots taken. They may ask you questions, and you will be charged with the crime. They'll give you papers and they'll let you know what you're being charged with. You'll be given a court date. What happens next? Your community should be there waiting to provide jail support. We're going to discuss that in the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Adam at that point. You should immediately be in contact with an attorney and getting your legal counsel in a line, like immediately. Hopefully your activist friends who are on the outside of jail are working on that behind the scenes to expedite that process. And then you'll have court dates set up. Sometimes at that first court date, the charges are dismissed. If they don't get a witness or no one presses charges, sometimes they are dismissed. Other times there's multiple court dates. And then sometimes it leads to a plea deal or some sort of supervision or probationary period where you'll get like a conditional dismissal. And other times it goes to trial, and your attorney will help you decide what is in your best interest. And then once you go through the court dates and potential trial, there'll be the trial can either be by bench or by jury. So you'll have the option of one or the other. And then whatever the outcome is of that, there could potentially be a punishment for misdemeanor stuff that is frequently what activists are charged with, like a disorderly conduct or a trespassing type charge. You might get something like community service. My arrest led to 30 hours of community service, and it was a conditional dismissal where after completing the 30 hours, they dismissed the charges. So community service is common. Probation, which is just a certain period of time where you cannot be arrested, a court supervision. Sometimes there's a fine involved. And then in more serious cases, there's jail or prison sentences. Sometimes there's a combination of any of these combinations of things. During the Q&A, we can even discuss if anyone here has ever been to jail or has been arrested and wants to share their experiences, or been to prison, had to serve a sentence. We can discuss that during the Q&A. So let's go on to what, while I was in jail in Chicago getting booked, Adam was on the outside along with several other activists leading jail support. So Adam's going to speak to what he did while I was behind bars.
Thanks, JJ. All right, everyone. So I'm going to take a minute here to check in, and I failed to do so prior to the presentation, but there's a lot going on outside of this presentation in the world. And also there have been some heavy content slides up to this point. So I just want to assure everyone we've got about 2-3 more slides left, very low content. And then we're going to have a Q&A, get some healthy discussion out there, let some of this anxiety flow out of all of us collectively, take some deep breaths here. So this slide about jail support is about how your community will come to your aid if you're arrested. Whether you plan to be arrested or not, your community will be there for you because this is our prepared stance. So before every action, there's a role given to someone that's known as jail support. This role, this person may or may not have to be at the action. And in often cases, they're not at the action. They are someone in a central location that can be available during the time of the action in case of an emergency, who has access to a safe and secure encrypted list of the names and dates of birth of the attendees of the action. Organizers and marshals in your local community should try to have something like that in a safe, secure area just in case of emergency. But again, obviously keeping that in a secure place and getting consent before storing people's information. One of the important things that happens once we interact with police on the street and get into out of the detention phase and into the arrest phase, someone needs to confirm what the location is of the jail. If you're in a large municipality like Chicago, there's going to be multiple jails. One action might actually result in activists going in multiple directions to different booking precincts, depending on where you are. So the individuals that are at the actions that are leaders of the actions, police liaison especially, should do their best to have a note and pen, pad and paper that says, here are this person named X went to X precinct to the best of your ability. Okay. Later, the public defender can work this out. Not a big deal if you don't find out, but it can be very key in the case of very fast mass arrests that you try. And just in case something like that happens, usually that's at the larger protests, not at our protests. You want to have that ready. The key part for activists, get everyone together, especially activists that were at the action, but especially open up that invite to the broader community. Because if you get those folks that weren't at the actions together and they're not just getting your information from channels or from Facebook, they're going to be much less anxious. They're going to be much more informed, and they'll be able to support. So getting information out about what has happened to the community and inviting them to a central location is something to do, because our resources can be centralized and used that way. One thing we want to make sure we do is that we have enough snacks, we have everyone calm, we have everyone in a safe location. We do not want to interact with police. Again, if you, one of the golden rules of the entire presentation, don't interact with police. There's no reason. If you have to, be prepared. So in this case, we're not going to interact with police. We're not going to interact with strangers outside the jail. We don't know who they are. They're not with our group. We generally want to be nice, but this is a good practice in general to not interact with anyone that could just be walking up trying to find information out about us. Prepare to be there all night. Be realistic with yourself. Go home, take care of your animals, come back, take care of your family, whatever it is you have to do, right? But if you are going to be jail support, prepare to be spending a lot of time sitting, bring a book, etc. Pre-arrange the arrested a ride home at all costs. If it's you, if it's an Uber, whatever you might be able to do, begin a fundraiser immediately, and court support will come later on if there are charges and if all of this goes through all of those stages that JJ mentioned before, right? None of this is guaranteed to this point. Many times charges are dropped, all kinds of scenarios. Further on this, I just want to pause before we go to the next slide and wrap up for Q&A. There is a group known as the National Lawyers Guild, which is listed on one of our slide sources. And they give a much more in-depth presentation about what's behind JJ's and I's last two slides here, because this, I know, must be bringing out anxiety and questions, and that's fine, that's understandable. But they give a wonderful presentation and are always available for us. And so if in the future we get another group together, we can certainly have NLG give us a basics that can get us in more in depth on what is going to jail. Next slide, and that resource will be shared on the point, the next slide, JJ. Thank you. So there are some links here. These are minimal links that we used as workshop sources. There are plenty of other places where we've gotten this information, and like JJ said, many of these experiences that we shared were firsthand. So thank you for being a trustworthy audience, for being good listeners and hearing us out on this stuff. Thank you for knowing that we are not necessarily professionals, but doing our absolute best to be professional grassroots organizers here with today's information. JJ, please head to the next slide, and then I'm going to give it back to you. I just want to speak and say a huge shout out to these organizations and the animal activism mentors. Without these organizations working together, we would not have a grassroots core here in Chicago like we do. And I would challenge to say that AAM maybe never would have even known who we were. So all thanks to all of these groups for all of their planning and all of their actions for animals. And thank you to everyone who has ever planned behind these groups and organized, even if your name isn't here, your group isn't here, if you're doing grassroots work for the animals, interacting with police, building a secure community, you're on my team. And back to you, JJ.
Ben, I also want to say that a lot of these groups will also be involved with AAM during the convergence here in Chicago, which is coming up in a few months. So if you're not registered for that, you should definitely register, because you'll get to meet some of the local organizers and get to work with some of these local groups. Again, this list is not, it doesn't include everyone. There's plenty of other people in Chicago, plenty of other groups that are doing stuff. And this is only specific to the Chicago group. There's, communities all over the country, and we want to thank every single one of you for the work that you're doing for animals. So let's move to the question portion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and we'll start taking questions. Back to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, JJ and Adam, for what you've shared. Is just excellent, valuable content. I hope everybody was paying attention and taking notes, and that was so well presented. So yeah, this is your turn now to ask questions. First come, first serve. The first hand up is Andres. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hello, thank you. So I have a question that may be useful for others. Last year I was in Chicago during that week of activism. I didn't join the group because my girl, she lives in Chicago, and she told me that usually there are the people that are detained or arrested in Chicago. And effectively someone, one of the speakers, was detained and arrested. And I haven't heard that happening in Miami. I know there's a plethora of reasons why, but definitely, how can an activist, for them to be able that they can remain being part of the society and remain being an activist, how can they avoid, or they know what would be the risks or the percentage, if possible, of how likely it is for a detention to happen? Like, how can someone know what are the patterns in a city, in a type of action about detentions? Because some of us, when we are not citizens, we definitely cannot risk getting detained, or getting arrested, because that will just complicate our situation in the country.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Andres. JJ, or I don't know how we're gonna do answers, but I can take that, or you can take it. How do you want to do that?
I think maybe we can both answer this one because we probably both have different experiences with it. I know firsthand people who, weren't planning an arrest and were arrested and weren't in a position where they should be, and it's caused all kinds of turmoil. So as organizers, we need to make that very clear. And the local grassroots activists should have a pretty good gauge on the climate and the relationships with cops and what the likelihood is that they're going to be more repressive. I travel all over the country with PETA to different cities, and it's so different from city to city how the police handle peaceful, nonviolent, legal actions on the street. Sometimes they're very aggressive towards us and very mean, and other times it's as if they're not even there. They're there in case something goes wrong and they're needed. But other than that, they're like, you're welcome to exercise your First Amendment, and we're, give us a shout if you need anything. So you can definitely check in with your local community and see what their thoughts are on the police. And you have a right to stand on a sidewalk, a First Amendment right to hold a sign and be there, especially if it's a permitted action. Definitely a much lower risk of arrest. The reality is, though, the police have murdered people in their sleep when they were in the wrong home and got away with it in America. And unfortunately, that's the reality. So there are no guarantees as an activist, unfortunately. I wish I could tell you that, but I've heard of people being arrested literally on their driveway holding the sign on their own property, and the police still arrested them. Now, that's usually thrown out in court and doesn't lead to anything else. But there are no guarantees in activism, so you have to just do your due diligence to keep yourself safe. Very great question. Go ahead, Adam.
And that being said, we need everybody, and you want to be a part of these actions, it sounds, and the animals need everybody. So let's just put it that way. So what we do is things like this. We have these workshops. We build principles and foundations for behaviors and actions that keep us safe. We know how to recognize patterns with police. We use tools like Police Liaison to interact with the police and have a positive interaction as much as that's possible. But let's be real. The Chicago police, they have a history of brutal repression. All of their tactics are well known around the globe. And it just needs to be said that, like JJ did just now, there are no guarantees. However, we are well trained here. We are well resourced. And we do know how the police are going to behave. I've participated in many levels of actions here, from just a handful of folks to thousands of folks post 45 election and things like that. So the police have behaved in various ways at all of those actions. I've seen various types of behaviors: very aggressive, extremely aggressive behaviors, more standoff behaviors, very confusing behaviors, right? But frankly, behaviors we know they are going to perpetrate against us. And so as long as we are aware of that and prepared, folks can safely participate in First Amendment right protest. I hope that gets us there. And I hope that kind of brings you around a little bit, but personally, I don't have the same experience as having to worry about a visa or citizenship or having had arrest previously. I don't have anything like that. So my risk level there is much lower than others, right? And so others who join these actions who have a higher risk level, they must think about these things. And I wish that I currently had more resources to say on it, but frankly, I do not. And so what I will guarantee is and promise here is that I will take further steps to get some detailed information on what folks such as yourself, Andres, may want to know more about.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been having this question because I've been to several protests in Chicago, mainly the Cubes of Truth from Anonymous for the Voiceless. And I have many friends that go to those, that go to other protests. For example, protests against FUR in front of, I forgot the name of the Canadian brand that is in front of the water tower. Mm-hmm. And many other actions, especially ones that are not in downtown. So definitely, apparently the pattern of arrest could be found in downtown, Chicago and in some of the actions. So I personally don't know, haven't seen or haven't heard a pattern from other activists from Chicago in which when it is safe for someone in a situation that wants to avoid at all costs an arrest, depending on the actions. So I will be in Chicago during this week of this year of protest. I would like to join, but I'm not completely certain on which action should I join and which not, if there's anything that I could do about that.
We'll
Yeah,
be
let's
sure to like,
definitely touch base
Yeah.
with you personally off the call for sure.
right, I'll say, yeah,
Perfect, yeah.
reach out to us, reach out to Trey, AAM, and we'll work with you on that. And just one general rule for anyone, if things start to look escalated by police, just leave. You put your sign down and excuse yourself. We don't want anyone to be in any situation they don't want to be in. So yeah, but we'll stay in touch, okay?
Thank you.
Let's go on to the, thank you so much. Let's go on to the next question. Panima, go ahead and unmute.
Hello. So I have a bunch of questions and I'm just going to do one at a time to give everybody else a chance to go. My first question is, recently I heard about a tactic to do when you get arrested from another activist, and I'm wondering what you guys think about it, if you ever heard of it, called complete non-compliance. Like when you don't give any information to the police, not your name, not your birthday, you don't pay bail, you just like sit there, you make them carry you to jail. I know you touched a bit on that with the like resisting arrest thing, but I just want to know what you guys think about like that kind of tactic.
I'm going to comment briefly and then pass it back to JJ. I don't have much on this, but I will say that having been at mass actions and then multiple National Lawyer Guild's presentations on this, you must, as a community and a group of activists participating in a particular action, decide that that is going to be a tactic that you use before the action. And everyone should know, and that should be something that's consensual. If you take that approach or that tactic and then you invite a bunch of folks that are just not comfortable with that, and you're putting them sort of at risk in some ways that they're not comfortable with, right? And so you always want to make sure that that you're communicating on that level. And again, I think just my experience with that is that happens at mass actions much more than sort of like your regular street protest. But I'm going to throw it over to JJ if there's more on that from him.
Yeah, my understanding is that you do have to give them your name. I mean, you have to give them your ID unless, if you don't have it on you, that's different. But you are required to give them your name, your address, and date of birth. They want to know who they're dealing with. They have a right to protect themselves. And if you have a repeat violent offender, which none of us are, we're, the most peaceful people in the world, but they don't know that, and they need to be able to identify you and know what they're dealing with. That doesn't mean that that's wrong. That's not the way I interact with the police. That's not the way I handle it when I was in jail. I agree with Adam. That should be set up with your community ahead of time, and then be ready to deal with the consequences of not cooperating. Is what I'll say.
It could mean longer time in detention, right? It could mean all kinds of things. But as a group, you're on the same page about that. What those consequences could mean for civil disobedience and non-cooperation.
Thank you guys. So just to like synopsis it, what you're saying is like, if it's going to be used in like mass action, everybody should be on board, like if that's the tactic. And then, if it's somebody's personal choice to do that, you should at least make everybody aware that that's what you're doing. Right?
I think that's my general stance at this point. And that's what I've gotten consensus from my immediate community. But again, this is sort of where it comes in, where I'm a grassroots community organizer, just doing this and living it with you. So if there is a better way on that, I'd love to know. But from all the training I've gotten, especially with the National Lawyers Guild, key advice is you have to be on the same page, and it's everybody, right? One or everybody.
All right, thank you guys.
Along those lines, someone asked about the only giving name if you're detained, arrested. Yeah, if you're just at a public event and they're talking to you, if you're not the liaison, you don't have to answer anything, not your name, nothing. It's only at the point of being arrested where you need to share that information with them. And you shouldn't share your name or any details because you're not the liaison. And so the only thing you should be saying to them is, I do not wish to speak to you, and walk away. You can ask them if you're being detained. So if it's not those things, which includes your name, don't give it to them.
The majority of actions in Chicago in the last 6 years have not resulted in arrest.
Right.
I don't care. I don't care where they were or what their nature was, but the majority of them in animal rights have not resulted in arrest. And so, speaking from firsthand, there are folks in this community who know the municipal rules, who know some of the stuff that we went through before the Q&A today, and who use those tools to get through actions safely without interacting with police, or interacting with police on a principled level. And as long as we do that, and we stay off Facebook thinking the only thing that happens in Chicago is arrest at fur actions, then we're going to be okay. But if we go into actions thinking, those cops are going to get us, it can create a different mood and a different liaison with police to be taking that approach.
Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in, so we want to try to get to all of them. Next is Marco. You have your hand up, so go ahead and unmute.
Hey guys. Hey JJ. Hey Adam. I just want to just mention one thing here. So you had mentioned a couple things. So you mentioned that the cops, that if you ask them for the reason that you're being detained, that they have to give you the reason. They do not have to give you the reason. They have to have reasonable articulable suspicion that you've committed a crime, are going to commit a crime, or are planning on committing a crime. But they don't actually have to articulate that. So they're within the right not to do that.
Right.
One thing one thing I would recommend everyone do, no matter where you are in the country here, is look up your state stop and ID laws. Most states do not have, and I guess, sorry, this is less of a question, just more of just something I wanted to mention. But most states do not have stop and ID laws, which means you only have to identify yourself to police if you are being arrested. If you are being arrested or if you are being threatened with arrest, then you have to identify yourself. Illinois and I think there's about probably like 12 states, I think, something around that, do have stop and ID laws. And in those, it varies, but in most of those, so in Illinois, you have to ID yourself if you are being legally detained, and they can request and force you to identify. And if you fail to identify at that point, then you can be arrested for failure to identify. But in other states, you can only be arrested for failure to identify if you're already being arrested for something else.
And that's why it's so key, Mark, that last point that you made, for everyone to know that as a tactic in Chicago, because it immediately escalates all your charges. So if that's going to be your tactic as a group, you must know that you will also be charged with that, right? But I'm sharing a legal municipality link here that everyone can search what you just told them to search, which is what your state ID stop and ID law is, or your even city or municipality.
Yeah, I think everyone should just familiarize yourself with your at least your state stop and ID laws. I think it's really important.
Thanks, Mark.
Definitely. And thanks for clarifying that, Mark. When you are being detained, yes, they don't have to give you that reason, but you want to try to get them to give it to you and to get that recorded. The same way they're trying to get information from you, try to get them to speak. They will frequently give you that reason, and so you should push for that. They don't want to detain you without a reason, so they will frequently tell you, and then if that changes, it can be used in court. So attorneys always recommend getting that information, but yes, it's not like you're free to go just because they don't give you that information. So there was a great clarification.
Excellent. So I think now we can go to Marco Karaki. Are you there? Or do you want to ask your question?
I'm here. Yes. Can you hear me well?
Hey, Marco.
Yep.
All right. I just have, I think, a simple question here. So I don't even know if officers approach you in this case, but if an officer was alerted by a liar, like a bystander, saying you punched someone, you punched them, and then the officer asks you for your side of the story, should you try to just calm things down and tell the officer what really happened, maybe with footage? or should you just shut them down and say, I ask them, am I being detained? What would be better in your opinion? What do you think?
Take that, JJ.
You should not incriminate yourself or discuss anything with the officer. That is not a courthouse. That is not the place to let that play out. When they're asking you about that, you're not going to sway them either way. By and large, if the police is intent on arresting you, they're going to do that. Nothing you say or do is going to change that. It will only ever work against you, but in like 99% of circumstances. So why take that like rare chance that maybe it'll help you when by and large, it could end up hurting you, especially as activists. They're usually looking for a reason to shut us down because it's a disturbance. People don't necessarily like hearing people chanting on megaphones. So assume that they're not on your side in this situation and let it play out. Get legal counsel right away, especially with something like, an assault where you're being accused of punching someone. You're definitely going to want a good defense, but that is not the place to do it. Absolutely not.
And I think,
If, go ahead.
Marco, sorry, go ahead. Well, Marco, I was just going to say, I've seen recently that folks are using video that they've taken of people that are either assaulting them or verbally attacking them, right? And they use the video when the police show up to say, I'm innocent. Like, I didn't do what this person is saying, and started calling me horrible names. And that might be a tactic at that moment, right? But in nonviolent direct action, it's sort of like it's a principle to avoid that interaction, if I'm not mistaken, JJ, and I want to make sure that, and go ahead, Marco, I know there was more, sorry.
I'm not sure if I fully understood if this was answering this, but I was going to ask a clarifying question. Like, if you did have someone live streaming the whole thing, would it not be appropriate to just show the officer and say, settle things down there?
We just don't get that interaction and opportunity. Most officers are not interested in us making our case street side. They just won't entertain it. They have other things to do. It's not their job to litigate the case on the street. So they're going to go ahead and make a decision, and they're going to decide based on you and the general mood of the action. Might even be their personal mood for the day, that they are just going to detain you or not. But again, before we even get to that interaction, we've taken so many more of these steps, like we talked about today.
And by showing them footage, you also run the risk of incriminating yourself for some other reason as well.
They're going to use it against you any way they can at the end of the day. Thanks, Mark. And JJ too. I mean, so Marco, I wish it was easier I wish they could be our friends and be there for us, but they're not.
I would encourage you. There was a link about like advice from attorney, and the caption of the video is why I will never speak to a cop. And this is from a criminal defense attorney, and he shows all these like just overwhelming examples of how your words can be spun against you, your evidence can be spun against you. You're not an attorney, you're not a professional, and you're entering a rabbit hole that you don't know the way out. And so he said, even as like, PhD, law, criminal defense, decades of experience, he said, to this day, I will not speak to a police officer under any circumstances. And so considering 99% of the time it doesn't work in your favor, why take those odds? Even if you have that compelling evidence, make sure you have a professional representing you if it were to go to court, and make them do their job of proving that there's a reason to arrest you. So I don't see it working in your favor more often than not, so just don't do it.
That helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is going to be Juan. Go ahead and unmute, Juan.
Hey guys, thank you for all that. I do have a couple questions. I'm a local organizer here in South Florida, and I am a police liaison for most of our actions. We have a couple down here, but if the other person is not around, I become the liaison. One question I do have is, rather than say, if you're a volunteer at an action, rather than say to the officer, I wish not to speak to you, am I being detained? And then you walk away, I feel like that might, piss them off a little bit. Is it okay to say that gentleman over there in the green hat is willing to speak to you? Like if they're looking for a liaison, I mean, I feel like that might be a better approach than to just piss them off from the beginning.
Yeah, so that is a tactic that frequently is used, especially amongst newer activism and newer activists, and where you're trying to keep, a very low temperature. Just in general, you want to keep a low temperature, but one way is to direct them to the liaison. There may be certain tactical reasons why you want to keep the cop guessing who the liaison is. So if they have to go activist to activist to figure out who the liaison is, because they're not giving that name easily, it can, stall for time. And so there's different reasons why you wouldn't necessarily direct to the liaison, and there's other reasons why you would. I'd say more often than not, it's probably the right move to.
Okay,
to
good.
direct
As long
to
as you're not against this, I just wanted to clarify that. And one last question. When is it a good time to ask to speak to the sergeant? Like if things start escalating a little bit, or because I was in a situation where an officer was, telling us something that was in the noise ordinance. And I said, can you please show us the noise ordinance? She was not willing to show us, and she flashed the phone in my face. She's like, there's a noise ordinance. And I'm like, can I read it? And she pulled the phone back. I'm like, you didn't give me a chance to read it. I mean, she's like, it's not my job to give you the ordinance. My job is to tell you what it is. And so that at that moment, I asked to speak to the sergeant. The sergeant did come. We spoke it out one-on-one. We reached a negotiation and everything worked out great. But that may not always be the case. So when is a good
Yeah.
time to do that?
Juan, let me take this one, JJ, if possible. I want to just cite Shannon Blair, who is excellent at this, from firsthand experience with her at actions and also just seeing video. I think I'll let JJ say what I think he's gonna say. But ultimately, Juan, in Chicago, when we're getting harassed like that, because they've done it before with the code and whatever, I will ask for a supervisor, maybe a little sooner. I'll suggest with the police liaison, let's talk, let's ask for a supervisor, because frankly, that is their mood towards you. And if they're going to do that, they're going to likely do worse, right? And so why put yourself and the others at further risk of some cop being a stooge because they're having a bad day, and get their boss involved? And we've done it multiple times.
I'm going to jump in real quick. We got a lot of questions, and this is specific to police liaison, very important stuff. And liaisons don't have the privilege of not speaking to police. Like, it's literally the job of the liaison to speak to police. That is like a far more complicated, like multi-hour, like training. It takes lots of experience and role playing, and there's going to be more training on that, Juan, and I'd love to discuss that with you further. It's just not the focus of today, and I don't want to confuse people and have them start asking for sergeants and getting themselves in situations where they shouldn't be. So this is just very level that applies to, like, the other 90% of the people at the protest should not be asking for the sergeant. That is a decision that the liaison will make based on various reasons. And we will discuss, we can discuss one-on-one, or, we're going to have more training on that to come for sure.
Yeah, no problem. I wasn't suggesting other people ask. I was suggesting the liaison ask, but I understand what you're saying. We can talk offline about that. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I will reiterate that we promise we will have a separate training on how to be a police liaison coming soon, to be announced. Next person with another question is Brian. Go ahead and unmute.
Hey guys, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hi, Brian.
I kind of had two questions. You kind of touched on it earlier that whenever the organizer is planning the action, to notify the participants of like what level of risk is going to be like taken at the action, and I guess you would determine that by talking to a lawyer ahead of time, and then so you kind of have that responsibility to inform like your participants about that. And do they need to like sign anything or other than just like a verbal notice that you're telling them that we're going to do, or do like how specific do you need to get and what you're doing for the action? Because obviously you do want to kind of keep some security culture around it. And I guess my other question was, if someone does get arrested at an action, how do you kind of like tell the community that things are going to be okay and that we can still continue to do actions and don't get scared from one arrest, right?
I'll take the last part, and then JJ, you take the first part. The last part
Sure.
is do things like this and educate and empower people to get information, be informed, and know what's going to happen on the street or if they're arrested. And JJ, take it.
Yeah, and also to speak to that, frequently it is the right decision though to shut down at that point. If police are being repressive and they're trying to find a way to shut down the protest, obviously we don't necessarily want to, but you don't know why they're arresting you. You don't know what code they might think you're violating or whatnot. And unless it's very clear or it was like a planned or something like that, sometimes the right decision is to keep everyone safe and just say, hey, we're gonna, come back another day. Not a big deal, but everyone, let's just end it here. And that's just to keep everyone safe. Could you remind me what the first part of your question was?
Yeah, I was just, you guys said, if we're gonna have a green or yellow type of action and what type of informed consent
Oh, right,
you need to
right,
give
yeah.
your volunteers along.
Yes. So security culture is top priority. Everyone, no one should know about an action unless they're involved in it, and no one should be asking about an action unless they're involved in it. That said, there are certain people who are at higher risk because of their, their visa status, or if they have, prior arrest records or pending charges. And you want to make it, you do want to make it aware to them that maybe, there might be like maybe you're doing a disruption inside a store or something, or you're using amplified sound, and you don't have to give them any details, but you can just let them know, hey, we're going to have megaphones here. And, the police in this municipality don't like megaphones. They've cracked down on them before, and let them decide that decision for themselves. Other times you used 100 megaphones and they don't care. So it's so different, city to city. And it is your job to do that research as an organizer and to give, as little details as possible, but make sure you're keeping your community safe. You definitely don't need anything in writing. I wouldn't encourage you to have like a list of names in writing of people who are going to an action. I don't see that being necessary nor advisable.
No, and I want to correct myself earlier because I did say to have a name and date of birth list, but what I mean is just in general for a community that you're involved in and that you're going to be going in and out of actions with. The other thing I want to get to about Brian is just in my experience with multiple layers of actions where some folks are planning arrest, other folks are not. The key point here and what's something that might be difficult in the animal rights movement is to have organizers organizing multiple levels of the action. And so the level of informed consent that someone is going to give is, I'm just coming to an action to hold a sign. Over there, some other activist is doing something else. I'm not with them. And claiming that is definitely legal and not lying or anything. You're showing up to hold a sign. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said on this, and I think it's strategic and can be expanded on in a whole nother presentation, really. But what do you think, JJ?
I wanted to touch on I guess you kind of said like at the action, if someone gets arrested, shut it down. But my question was kind of like after the fact, like how do you like reassure the community that we can continue to do activism and like arrests shouldn't shut down the movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And unfortunately, that is part of the reason why that is a tactic that's used against us. When 3 of us were arrested in Chicago, it kind of killed the momentum for a brief moment. And there was a lot of fear as organizers having trainings like this, having discussions around it. It makes people uneasy, it makes people nervous. But when they're well prepared and they feel like they have the training and that they know their rights and that their community has their back, I think that goes a long way to keep people, keep the morale up and keep people confident in what they're doing. And just reminding them that we're not the bad guys here. Like, we are peaceful, we're disciplined, and we're fighting for the lives of non-human animals, humans. The future of this planet depends on a shift away from animal agriculture. There are lives at stake that are being tortured, in labs, on factory farms. It was legal to own slaves in antebellum, South, and it was illegal to hide slaves or help them run away. It was legal for Nazis to massacre Jews and anyone that was seen as an enemy, but it was illegal to hide them. It was illegal for women to vote, but fighting for women's right to vote was illegal. Civil rights, I mean, throughout history, you can see who was on the wrong side of everything, which was the police who were enforcing the unlawful or the laws that are unethical, and the activists were pushing society in a better direction that ends up being better for everyone. So reinforce them that, yeah, we are operating in a space where we set ourselves up for attack and that there are potential consequences, but we're the heroes. We're the ones that are going to change the world, make the world better for everyone, literally save the world from global warming. And, unfortunately, it's not a space that comes without consequences, but it's well worth it, and they're few and far between. If you're doing, grassroots organizing on a public sidewalk holding a sign, you might get the occasional disorderly conduct charge, and more frequently it's thrown out, and more often than not it's like a community service or a brief time of supervision, and the charges are frequently dismissed. So you're not looking at like years in jail or anything like that. So it's really not anything to be super afraid of. You just want to be prepared and ready for it.
I just want to go back. I saw a question from Mikey earlier, and it was regarding the the action behavior of side chatter when you're an activist at an action. I saw it in the chat, and I'm sorry to butt in, but I wanted to make sure that Mikey's question got out there. It's a good one, and we definitely want to make sure that side chatter, that you're taking your cues from marshals, that you're taking your cues from the liaison, that you're keeping your eyes on the police, and that you're not necessarily talking back and forth between activists, definitely not socializing, but staying alert and aware of what's happening at an action. Side chatter can become, hey, what's going on? What do you see over there? Oh my gosh, look at that. That's awesome. He's doing the blood pour now or something, like that kind of thing can distract you and the activists around you. I just want to say someone, Dan and Sheena, you guys have had some phenomenal views in the background for the whole call. Looks like a wonderful sky where you are.
That's also the space that infiltrators will operate in, is asking these side questions and trying to get information. And if you're not part of an action, you shouldn't be talking about it. Obviously, activism needs to be fun. So we don't want to say there's absolutely zero talking all the time, because, this is a way that people, it's an outlet for people. But we are there to do a job. So while we want to enjoy what we're doing, if you stay focused on the animals and focused on why we're there and the action, you're going to be more successful as an activist. You're going to keep your guard up, and you're going to look more disciplined. So for all those reasons, I encourage chatter to be to a minimum. Like, there's plenty of time to converse before and after an action. While we're there to rescue literal lives, save lives. So don't downplay the severity of what we're doing.
Hey, JJ, Adam, while we're on this topic, would you mind covering just like saying people's names and that kind of thing? Because I think it goes along with this.
Yes, Juan did an awesome job earlier when he gave an example. He said, the guy in the green hat over there, everyone I know that's an animal rights activist is a guy or a gal wearing a colored piece of clothing that day. So I basically just remove everyone's name from my vocabulary if I can. The other thing is when you're at an action, if you have questions, right, you certainly don't want to be going straight to the police liaison or straight to the marshal who planned the action, because then that of course is making the police think, okay, that's the person with all the information. Like, we need to focus in on what they're doing, right? So you want to keep side chatter to a minimum and kind of talk all at once to folks when it's time for discussion, but maintaining that professional behavior, and also knowing that you can say, that gentleman or that young lady over there with the purple coat, she's able to talk to the police today and has all the information about this protest for you. I'm not talking, and they know it's their job to do so, to go gather that information from that police liaison, and that's part of our right. Did that cover it, Trey? Sorry. That was everything.
Well, just, I think it's important for people to keep in mind that, like, a lot of activists at events are filming.
Right.
If you're trying to get somebody's attention for some reason, and there's police around, or there's people, recording and this and that, if they don't want their name to be said, we shouldn't say their name.
Right. And when police, Mikey, thank you for the question. When police ask, who is the leader? Who is the organizer? We don't answer that question. There's no leader or organizer in our movement. We are a grassroots, non-hierarchical movement on purpose. And so for that matter, I will just give you an example here of where we were doing a Chicago teach-in in front of the water tower place. And Shannon and some folks had come up with, before AAM came up last year. So this was 2 years ago. And we had interactions with the police where they had already taken care of the liaison. They had already gotten information from the liaison, decided that everything was fine. We had to move our food. Our food could not be on a table, had to be on a cart with wheels. And then of course we could serve food. It was some BS loop they made us jump through in the moment, but we did it and we went on. Later, the police, the two of the police came up to me and some of the people behind the table to ask for more information, to ask who is the leader. Those were their direct questions. Who is running the show here? They weren't not only going to get that, they weren't going to get that answer from us, but they were directed back to the police liaison. And they went and they left us alone.
Yeah, and we make a point in Chicago to be as non-hierarchical as possible. Anyone can organize, anyone can bring up ideas, and everyone plays their part. So there really isn't, it's honest when you say there is no leader or organizer for many of our actions. You know, that's not true of all of our actions in Chicago, and it's definitely not true of everyone in our movement. We really like that way of structuring in a lot of the groups in Chicago, and I think it has many benefits. I would encourage you to look into that. One thing that should be true, though, whenever possible, again, if you're in a smaller community, a lot of times you're the only organizer and you're the only one who's trained to interact with police. But in general, you want the people who are organizing. Let's say you're doing a march, right? And they're deciding on a route that they want to take. Your marshals, your police liaisons, your marshals may need to know the route so they can, direct traffic and keep everyone safe. But your liaisons don't, and your marshals shouldn't be your liaisons, and your organizers shouldn't be your liaison either, because when they ask you, like, what route are you taking? Which way are you going? And that happened with one of the marches that I don't even know who organized. I was just asked, can you be a liaison by someone in the community? I said, sure. And I was a liaison for a march in Chicago, and they said, which way and everyone was directed or everyone was told to direct the police only to me. I was liaison. They said, all right, give us your route. And I was like, I don't know the route. And they said, who's in charge? I didn't know who was in charge. No one told me who organized the march. No one told me the route. And so it was just my job to keep the peace with the police and talk to them and keep everything, like I said, keep a low temperature. But I could not answer the direction of the route or direct them to anyone else because I didn't know who else could answer that question.
The end of
that kind of structure, super important.
Sorry, JJ, I keep interrupting. The end of that action resulted in a successful march without interference, except JJ got shoved a few times. So just
I got thrown to the ground like 3 different times with my hands up. And I actually had a peace sign, and I said, "I'm the liaison. You can direct your questions to me." And I was met with a shove almost to the ground, like within a second. And I got back up, and I said, "Hey, we're here peacefully." I showed him my hands, and I said, "Any questions you have, you can direct to me." And
so the experienced activist, like JJ, took the heat, and everyone else went on.
And he kept saying, "Who's in charge?"
Yeah.
Right. He kept saying, "Who's in charge here?" And I said, "You can speak to me on the police liaison." And they want to know routes. They want to know all this information. They didn't get anything. No one got arrested. It was a peaceful, wonderful day. Other than, the two or three shoves that I got from an officer, everyone went home. We had a very effective action. I think at one point there might have even been a banner drop. It was a beautiful day. And it worked perfectly because we had all the resources in place and everyone knew their roles and their responsibilities, and we kept tight security culture. And, we encourage everyone to kind of organize in that way. There's a lot of benefits to it.
Okay, thank you so much. I know we're going way over, but we're going to continue for just a little bit longer and try to answer the last couple of questions before we wrap up tonight, because this is so informational and important. So Panima, you have a question.
Yes. So I know I have a lot of activists that are worried about doing types of actions that they think might end in arrest because they can't have a record for whatever reason. So my question is, when does an arrest lead to a record? Like, do you have to be charged with something to have a record? Like if they try to get a job and they do a background check, will they see an arrest that didn't lead to like a felony or a misdemeanor charge still come up?
I'll answer that one because I'm going through that process right now. It's just at the Chicago Police Headquarters on Thursday. Obviously my charges were dismissed, as I said earlier. But that arrest record does stay on your record. My understanding, don't quote me on this, I'm not, a lawyer by trade, but my understanding is that the arrest stays on your record, but it doesn't show up in most background checks. I think like FBI or police background checks, that does still show up, but your typical just generic like background check for a job, unless it's like a very secure job, maybe like education, or if you're working for the government or something, it might show up if they do a more thorough check. But for most of them, my understanding is that just an arrest that did not lead to a conviction doesn't stay on your record. That said, if your charges are dismissed, if the case is thrown out, you can get that expunged from your record, which is why I was at the police headquarters to get those papers to start the process. So you can even have the arrest record removed from your record. So it's as if it never happened. It won't show up in any search.
Thanks, JJ. My only thing to add is NLG gives us a very detailed, they're happy to do so, rundown of what that is, Panima. And we can get it from their website, or we can have Melinda Power directly present it to us.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, Panima. Rita, you have a question now. Go ahead and unmute.
Hey, this is more like a commentary. I recently participated in or attempted to participate in a rodeo protest. And the town that we were protesting in has implemented a new code. It's like an addendum to an old code, where any public protest or anything like any public assembly requires a permit, even if it's family members or just friends getting together. It's not an organization. It's not a 501c. It's not a corporation. It's nothing. It's just people. Two friends cannot. And so we tried it with two of us, thinking that maybe two friends could go out there. No. So we skirted it by, decorating our cars and driving through the parking lot and, parking cars where spectators could see it. But in addition to not being allowed to do that, they said there's no charge for the permit itself, but there's an application fee. And upon some investigation, this is a fairly new ordinance that's creeping into many city codes and small town codes throughout the country. And it's a public assembly code that is, and the police officer was uneducated enough to tell me exactly why. The police captain, I said, well, why did you start this? Why can't people just do this? And he said, oh, because of all the trouble and all the violence during the last administration. And so it's just a heads up. I did a little research. I found the code in many towns in Rhode Island, Georgia, Mississippi, Arizona, Maine, New Hampshire. There is, and it said it's written identically. So it's very well worth everybody's time that wants to have any kind of, this was a completely peaceful protest. We weren't going to do anything but stand there and hold signs, and we're not allowed to do it. So, and it is a finable offense if they decide they want to fine you for it. So it seems totally illegal to me because it squelches freedom of speech entirely, but don't know how to circumvent it, and they don't have to issue the permit. And 9 out of 10 times, if it's a protest, they won't.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm a firm believer. I know everyone here is like animal rights activists, and that is obviously my biggest passion, biggest focus, working for PETA. So definitely why we're geared towards that. But I really believe that all liberation movements are tied together, and that we always do the chant of one struggle, one fight, human freedom, animal rights, and it's so true. If you think you can only be an animal rights activist and not also fight back against an oppressive police state or surveillance state or government, you got another thing coming. It makes our job as activists more difficult when they can have these more restrictive laws on the book. And that's why people who aren't necessarily vegan, and I know some people may not agree with this, but people who aren't vegan, maybe consume animals and haven't seen the light of the light that we see and understand the suffering of our fellow earthlings, they can still be allies in this fight. If they're fighting, if it's Black Lives Matter or fighting for police reform, we should be supporting their initiatives, and hopefully they are supporting our right to assemble, even if they don't agree necessarily with our message. And I can't speak to that ordinance specifically. I'm not an attorney. Just because something is an ordinance doesn't make it constitutional. That's not the focus of today's presentation, and that's not the focus of most animal rights activists. But if it's something you're interested in challenging, there are groups that can potentially look into these laws and see if they are unconstitutional, and then fight back on them. It can be a long process. It's not something any one of us has the answer to today, but there are plenty of activist lawyers out there that literally have dedicated their life to fighting things like this. And I would say if you don't take initiative on challenging that, who will? So get with your local NLG chapter, National Lawyers Guild, or any other activist type lawyer, vegan or otherwise. As long as they are on the side of freedom of speech, they are going to be the best equipped at fighting this. And any other groups, like we have a strong Refuse Fascism group in Chicago, and a strong, Black Lives Matter group, and just a lot of community organizing, labor organizing, and they push back on codes like this. And part of the reason that I didn't have to pay bail, for example, when I got arrested, is because of the work of activists who challenged the money bail, that we're paying money that only the wealthy can get out of jail, and anyone that can't afford bail is stuck in there until they get a court date or however long. So that was a initiative that wasn't animal rights related, but it affected many animal rights activists in Chicago. And so I think that this is a perfect example to bring up the importance of how we're all in this fight together. It's really us as activists against repression. This is what democracy looks like, and we have to fight for that democracy every single day.
Thank you. Yeah, it's more a heads up than, and I am in touch with a lot of different legal groups, et cetera, to fight it. But
awesome,
okay.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Keep us posted. Please keep us posted. Yeah.
Yes, I'd love to share contact information and hear how that's going.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Brita. Shreya, you're next.
Hey, awesome workshop. Thank you, JJ and Adam, for doing this. And I think the highlight for me was hearing from Gatsby, because he had a lot of insightful bits to offer. So yeah, I guess my question is regarding when folks get either detained or, when you mentioned taking out your phone to record, but also, having your hands up and making sure that you're coming across as non-threatening, etc. So say you're in that, you do have your phone in your back pocket and you're confronted by a police officer and you want to reach to get your phone. How do you advise one communicates that? Like, is it my only frame of reference is in the movies where they're like, I'm going to reach into my phone, like my back pocket to get my phone, et cetera, et cetera. So is that how you would advise going about it? Or is there a certain way to, and like, should you let them know that I'm going to get my phone so I can record you? Or in the case that there isn't anyone in the near vicinity to record what's happening?
I mean, unless you're at the action by yourself, there hopefully is someone around that can record, and ideally other people should be recording in addition to you. You want as many cameras on the police at that point as possible. But yeah, so like even for like a basic traffic stop, for example, I keep my hands on the steering wheel and I let the cop know every action I'm doing so that it doesn't cause any anxiety on their part. They don't know who they're dealing with, so that's the tactic I like to use. You want to look cooperative because you're getting recorded probably at that point, and that could, come up in discovery during your court case, and it doesn't look good to be standoffish with the police at that point if it goes in front of a judge or jury. So yeah, I think just saying I'd like to have this recorded, and if a cop tells you no, again, that's why it's good to have other people recording. Then you got that on video if other people have their phone out of a cop denying you your right to record them, which is a right that you have. as a citizen. And it's the one thing that keeps, police in check and holds them accountable is our ability to record them. So if you tell them I'm going to grab my phone out, it's in my back right pocket, and I'd like to record this conversation, they should allow you to do that. And then you do that. And just in general, I let them know, like, I'm going to be recording you. And I have my phone out and I make sure they can see it. Like, it's like here, it's not like I don't try to do any subversive where they're not sure of it. And there's many reasons for that, but the main one is part of what keeps them well behaved is knowing that they're on camera, knowing that it can make them look bad. So it's just seeing that phone may make them act differently towards you, more respectful. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, my question was mostly related to, yes, even if there are other people recording, you did emphasize the point of ourselves recording in the case that we're in that position. So how to go about that without escalating the situation. So yeah, that was very helpful. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So we're going to go to Dana, and Dana is going to be the last question just for the sake of time for our workshop. Go ahead, Dana.
Okay, sorry, last question. I'll be quick. I just thought of this. So I bought a body camera for filming horse carriages downtown here because it's very sketchy. Would it be a good idea to wear that to a lot of events? It films for a long time, but I didn't know if that was, I don't know. I just felt like it couldn't hurt. So just curious.
I
definitely
am
couldn't
looking,
hurt.
yeah, personally, Dana, I'm looking into buying one to have on at all times. I was going to do so 2 years ago after I got creamed by a car door and knocked into traffic, just to have on me when I ride my bike. But now I'm realizing, whoa, it could come into a very handy situation recording police. And it wouldn't surprise me, I'm reading some comments here, if just like the right to peacefully assemble, the right to record police will be challenged. So, be prepared, be awake about it.
Absolutely. And you're going to want to look at those laws too, because you don't want to, there are certain states that have like two-party consent for recording laws. And if you violate that, they sometimes are very strict about the consequences. I think some places they even put it under like the Espionage Act, which like seems, insane to me, but there are consequences for that. So you want to be aware of your local ordinances. It's horrible that they would want to change that. Like, why would anyone not want police to be held accountable and be recorded? Like, that seems very like only detrimental to our freedoms and our democracy, but it does happen. Dana, my rule is like record everything. You never know when that's going to come in handy, and you do not want their narrative to be the only one that's going to be shared in court. They're going to have their spin. They're going to have their story.
Right.
My understanding is they don't even have to show every second of the footage. I believe they might be able to even just show the part that, or they might just turn on their body cam at a point that it suits them best. And we're not going to get the full picture from them. Their job is to prosecute, and arrest. It's our job to defend ourselves. So having that narrative and having it on camera is probably your only chance at fighting that. So not having that could be detrimental, and I can't see a reason why it would be bad to have that. Just again, know your local ordinances if there's any laws about recording.
Okay.
Yeah, in general, sorry, just about it. In general, recording the police is protected by the Constitution. A lot of police will say things like, "You don't have to record. I'm recording all those on body cam," but we all know body cam footage goes missing. Sometimes you get denied, even though you technically have legal access. You have a legal right to access it, but if they try to get you to not record, because they can ask you to not record, they just can't force you to not record. They ask you to not record, say, "I'm still recording."
Okay. Wait.
Absolutely. And Tria's question about if the two-party consent rule applies to the police cameras, I know that in a lot of cases here in Chicago, the police will tell us they're turning it on. But in other cases, it's just on and they haven't told us. So I don't know if the laws actually apply, but there are cases where police tell us they're turning them on. They make it a point.
So wait, following up on that, sorry. So I thought you were always, I know that different, like Georgia's a one-party, I live in Georgia. Georgia's a one-party consent state with phone calls. And I think Chicago is a two-party consent state, actually, because I looked that up a while ago. But But I thought everywhere, if you were on public property, you were allowed to film them. That's your
Right.
legal right everywhere in the United States, correct? Okay,
You're-
okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
my
there-
understanding, but you know, I would always check local ordinances
Yeah.
and just check with a local attorney that knows that, because I'm not a legal expert, but yeah, my understanding is if you're on public property, there is no right to privacy.
Yes.
In which
Right.
case it should be fine. But like as soon as you go into a department store, you know, or any kind of private property, that immediately changes, and it can get ugly quick depending on what ordinances are in. So you want to know what you're getting yourself into ahead of time. Don't go in without doing your research.
There is public property that is restricted though as well. So for example, like, you know, a police station is public property, but there are areas that are restricted, like, where you cannot film. But in general, yeah, if you can see it from public, you can film it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Great conversation, great questions, great answers. So I'm not seeing any further questions, although I'm sure there are some, but we're gonna wrap up, and you know, with the promise that this is really to be continued. So hang in there for just another few moments, everybody. And you know, if you'd like to share your Instagram handles in the chat, please go ahead and do that. If you want to share any takeaways from tonight, that would be great. Go ahead and share that in the chat as well. Everybody give a big wave and a round of applause to JJ and Adam for their presentation tonight. Really amazing. And then I'm just going to go to a few announcements, a few AAM announcements. Upcoming workshops. May 19th, we have a writing and publishing as activism workshop with Maya Cohen Ronan. On May 24th, we have a plant-based treaty workshop with Anita, the director of the SAVE movement. On June 2nd is filmmaking as activism. On June 6th, we have security culture, staying safe as an activist. So another great continuation of this. And then we have 3 large live events coming up that I want to announce. The first one's been mentioned, the AAM Chicago Convergence 2022. Yay, is a 10-day animal rights activism event that will be largely focused on taking action against the fur industry, but will also include actions against the animal agriculture industries. The dates are July 29th through August 7th. And this weekend coming up is the Tampa Turnout, May 6th through the 8th, 3 days of action for the animals. There'll be outreach, demos, protests, and a march. Then the AAM Ohio Occurrence is a 3-day animal rights activism event in Cleveland, Ohio. And this event will feature several different types of animal rights activism. All activists are welcome to all of our events, and the dates for that one are September 2nd through the 4th. So for details and to register for all of these events, you can go to AAM's page, or you can reach out to any of us. Or maybe someone will put some of the links in the chat now, even to the event pages. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, JJ and Adam, for your time and wisdom. Thank you, Trey, for managing the technical back end. Thank you, everyone, for the work you're doing for the animals in our world. Again, if you're interested in becoming a mentor or a mentee or want to get involved, please reach out to any AAM mentor or visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. Meanwhile, we'll add you to our email newsletter list as well. So thank you, everybody, so much. Stay strong and live vegan, everyone. Thank you.